Okay, Gus, you guys ready to pick up now? Hey! Shut down fire in the cockpit!
For NASA astronauts, every mission is a matter of life and death. Today we delve into some of the last quotes from astronauts moments before harrowing accidents in space. Michael J. Adams was an astronaut who flew the X-15 rocket plane, a cutting-edge aircraft at the time. His last flight was on November 15, 1967. He reached an altitude of 266,000 feet, but when the nose of the X-15 veered off course by 15 degrees as he descended, the aircraft went into a dangerous spin. It was chaotic, with the plane experiencing extreme forces, over 15 Gs vertically and 8 Gs laterally. Just 10 minutes after launch, Adams announced, "I'm in a spin," before the X-15 broke apart, killing him instantly. After the accident, search teams tried to recover evidence from the wreckage. The cockpit camera was retrieved, which recorded the flight, but the film inside was missing. Eventually it was found though, allowing the investigators to learn exactly what happened during his final moments. Final ILS-24 was the last radioed transmission sent by Elliot C. before he died in a tragic accident along with fellow NASA astronaut Charles Bassett. On February 28, 1966, an accident occurred at Lambert Field in St. Louis, Missouri. Elliot C. and Charles Bassett were on a routine training flight of a NASA Northrop T-38 Talon. C was piloting the jet, and Bassett was in the rear seat, while another T-38 carried their backup crew, Tom Stafford and Eugene Cernan. After taking off from Ellington Air Force Base in Texas, they ran into trouble. As they approached St. Louis, they missed their landing marker and overshot the runway. C tried to land on the southwest runway. As he descended, the plane dropped too far left, and he activated the afterburner to gain altitude while turning right. Unfortunately, at 8:58 a.m., the jet crashed into the roof of McDonnell Aircraft's Building 101, where the Gemini spacecraft was being assembled. The T-38 lost its right wing and cartwheeled into a parking lot. Both astronauts died instantly from the impact. C was found ejected from the cockpit, still strapped to his seat. Bassett's body was discovered later in the building. The crash also injured 17 McDonnell employees. American test pilot Michael Alsbury died in 2014 during a test flight, his last words being "pitch up" moments before the accident. On October 31st, 2014, the VSS Enterprise, a Spaceship Two experimental space vehicle, crashed into the Mojave Desert. The flight, known as Powered Flight 4, was the first powered test in 9 months and aimed to test a new hybrid rocket engine using nylon fuel instead of rubber. The VSS Enterprise was piloted by Peter Seibold and co-piloted by Michael Alsbury. After being released from its carrier aircraft, VMS Eve, the space plane fired its engine as planned. Just 11 seconds into the flight though, the Enterprise broke apart, creating a massive debris field stretching 35 miles. Witnesses reported seeing a parachute before the crash. Tragically, Alsbury was killed in the incident, while Seibold survived with serious injuries and was transported to a nearby hospital. Seibold managed to escape the wreckage and was parachuted to safety. It was a rare given the circumstances. He reported that the aircraft broke apart around him, but his parachute deployed automatically after he unbuckled his seat. In 1966, during the Gemini 8 mission, David Scott radioed to ground control after a seemingly successful dock, stating, quote, "Flight, we are docked. Yes, it's really a smoothie." Little did he and Neil Armstrong know that things were about to be the exact opposite of smooth. Gemini 8 was launched on March 16, 1966. It was going to be a historic flight, the first ever docking in space, where the Gemini spacecraft would link up with an Agena target vehicle. The plan was for astronauts David Scott and Neil Armstrong to spend 3 days in space doing experiments and a spacewalk. Well, shortly after docking, Scott and Armstrong noticed the spacecraft was starting to roll uncontrollably. Armstrong tried to stabilize using its thrusters, and it stopped for a moment, but then it started rolling again. Out of communication range with mission control, they had to make a quick decision. They realized that the high spin rate could damage the spacecraft or even cause the Agena to explode, so they undocked from it. But without the added weight of the Agena, the Gemini began to spin even faster. Unfortunately, they'd used up a lot of their re-entry fuel while stabilizing the spacecraft, so they had to cut the mission short and make an emergency landing. Scott later praised Armstrong stating the guy was brilliant. He knew the system so well, he found the solution, he activated the solution under extreme circumstances. It was my lucky day to be flying with him. On July 16, 2013, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano's spacewalk of the ISS was cut short when he reported that water was filling up his spacesuit. As he was working outside, water started leaking into his helmet. Total nightmare scenario. But not only was his helmet filling with water, but it was floating around and blocking his vision, made it hard to hear because of the weightlessness in space. Parmitano ended up spending just over an hour outside, making it one of the shortest spacewalks in ISS history. He later said, "I started going back to the airlock and the water kept trickling. It completely covered my eyes and my nose. It was really hard to see. I couldn't hear anything. It was really hard to communicate. I went back using just memory, basically going back to the airlock until I found it." Fortunately, he made it back inside the ISS safely, but the experience, understandably, left him pretty shaken.
The Great Attractor. Imagine our galaxy, the Milky Way, is being pulled towards this mysterious, powerful force. This force, known as the Great Attractor, rather fitting name, is so strong that it's influencing the motion of millions of galaxies. It's like a cosmic vacuum cleaner sucking everything towards it. Scientists aren't sure exactly what's causing this strong pull, but they suspect it might be a massive cluster of galaxies or even a supermassive black hole. As our galaxy is being pulled towards the Great Attractor, it is possible that we could collide with other galaxies along the way, and we could collide with even another galaxy. It would be a disaster, messing up our entire solar system and maybe even threatening life here on Earth. Coronal mass ejection. Imagine the sun burping out a giant fiery cloud. Now this cloud, called a CME or a coronal mass ejection, can be super dangerous if it hits Earth. Big if on that one. These CMEs can be incredibly powerful if they hit Earth. They can even cause serious problems. They can disrupt our power grids, cause widespread blackouts, all bad. They can also damage satellites and other technology that's currently in space. In extreme cases, they could even harm astronauts on the International Space Station. In 2012, a huge CME missed Earth by just a week. Scientists say that if it had hit us, it could have caused a massive blackout that would have taken years to recover from. Close call. Mega comet. This cosmic giant is so big, it's been nicknamed a mega comet. It's over 80 miles wide, which is bigger than most moons, and as this giant comet gets closer to the sun, it's waking up and shredding dust and ice every single day. Its sheer size and unpredictable behavior make it a cause for concern. A close encounter with this comet could have unforeseen consequences, potentially disrupting Earth's orbit or even triggering a catastrophic event. Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. Thanks. Supernovas. If a supernova were to occur relatively close to Earth, it could have devastating consequences. The intense radiation emitted by the eruption could strip away Earth's ozone layer, leaving us vulnerable to harmful solar radiation. This could lead to increased rates of skin cancer and other health problems. For astronauts, a nearby supernova would be even more dangerous. The radiation could penetrate their spacecraft, exposing them, of course, to lethal doses. Even if they were shielded, the long-term effects of exposure to such an intense radiation could be catastrophic. Fermi bubbles. These sound innocent enough, right? I mean, bubbles? What are we talking about? Picture two giant invisible bubbles floating in space, each millions of light years wide, okay? They're massive. They're filled with dangerous high-energy radiation, and if astronauts travel through any of these bubbles, they could get sick from the radiation very fast. It's like being in a really strong radiation zone for a very long time, and you're also in space. Plus, the radiation could damage the electronics on spaceships, which could be a big problem for astronauts who are far from home and plan on returning. In 2023, former NASA astronaut Leroy Chiao, who commanded Expedition 10 and piloted 3 space shuttle flights, they reported a perplexing encounter with 2 unidentified flying objects. UFOs. Yeah, real aliens. This was discovered while piloting his private plane over Texas. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Chiao observed 2 metallic spherical orbs, each approximately 3 feet in diameter, approaching his aircraft. That ought to be terrifying. The orbs passed within 20 feet of his plane, moving at high speeds, and without any communication from air traffic control. This is bizarre. Now, despite the close proximity, the objects did not appear on his plane's radar either. Chiao speculated that the orbs might be part of a military drone program, but could not confirm their nature. This incident adds to the growing number of reports of mysterious aerial phenomena, including recent drone sightings in New Jersey and Staten Island, and the Pentagon's release of footage of an unidentified orb in military airspace definitely doesn't help. The incident underscores the need for continued research and open discussion regarding UFOs, especially given the increasing number of reports from credible sources like astronauts and military personnel. Have you ever heard about the Bermuda Triangle, but in space? Yeah, even scarier. It's a region in the South Atlantic anomaly where satellites and spacecraft experience strange malfunctions and disappearances. It's like a cosmic Bermuda Triangle, a place where technology seems to go haywire and vanish all without a trace. Some scientists believe it's caused by intense radiation from the Van Allen belts, which is a region of the charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field. Others theorize that it might be a result of dark matter or even extraterrestrial interference, which I'm on board for. Imagine a satellite perfectly functional one moment and then suddenly it loses contact. Its systems shut down one by one as if it were being pulled into a black hole. The strangest part? Astronauts who have passed through this region have reported strange occurrences, like seeing strange lights and feeling an eerie sense of dread. Some even claim to have encountered unidentified objects, massive silent vessels that seem to watch their every move. Yeah, almost like a ghost, but in space. It's a scary mystery, a place where the laws of physics seem to bend and break. And the worst part, we're still no closer to understanding what truly happens in the Bermuda Triangle of space. Radio signal blasters. Picture a super powerful radio signal blasting out from a faraway galaxy aimed straight at Earth, right at us. It's like a cosmic SOS, a message in a bottle just floating in the endless openness of space. Scientists are of course stumped, and as are we. They've never seen anything like this before. This signal is super strong, pulsing with energy, and some experts think that it might be signs of aliens trying to reach out to us. Others think it could be a natural thing, something we don't quite understand yet, but the real mystery is what the signal is saying. It's not just a simple message, it's a complicated pattern, a language that we still can't figure out. Some people think it might be a map or a plan for something way beyond our understanding. If this is a message from aliens, what do they want? And what if they're not so far away? The truth is out there, and it might be closer than we think. Oumuamua is a mysterious object that zipped through our solar system a few years ago. It was unlike anything we've ever seen before. It was a long, cigar-shaped, and it was moving way too fast. Some scientists think that it might be a natural object, like say a comet or an asteroid, but others have a more interesting and scary theory. Some believe that it could be a probe sent by an advanced alien civilization. Now imagine a spacecraft, designed by beings far more intelligent than us, exploring our solar system, all while being undetected. The strangest thing about Oumuamua is its acceleration. It seemed to have sped up as it left our solar system, as if it had its own propulsion system. What's even more frightening is the possibility that Oumuamua is not just a passive object. Some speculate that it could be this self-aware entity capable of gathering information and even interacting with our world. The thought of an alien intelligence lurking in the shadows of our solar system, well, that right there is enough to send chills down your spine. Vampire stars. Yep, this is exactly what it sounds like. These space monsters suck the life out of other stars, making them smaller and weaker. They steal energy from other stars to make themselves bigger and stronger. Talk about selfish. These vampire stars can get really, really big, stealing enough life force to last for billions of years. And as they eat, they shoot out these harmful rays that can mess up whole planets. This makes us wonder about our own sun. I mean, could it get eaten by a vampire star and die a slow, painful death? Well, let's hope not. Space is a dangerous place, and that's why I prefer it here on Earth. At least most days. Giant rogue black hole. What's more scary than a black hole in outer space? Well, that's easy. It's a giant rogue black hole in outer space. These giant black holes are billions of times bigger than our sun, and they just wander around space eating everything and anything in their path. Now, scientists think that these monster black holes could be hiding in the dark, and we might not even know that they're there. If one of these things came into our galaxy, it could destroy planets, stars, and maybe even our whole Milky Way galaxy. So what can make these rogue black holes even scarier? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's one called B3174525. This rogue black hole is moving through space at 3 million miles per hour, and it was discovered by the Hubble telescope in 2017. It is thought that this monster broke free after two galaxies crashed right into each other. Now it's just roaming around in space doing whatever it wants. Now the good news here is that it's 2 billion light years away from us, so for now, we're safe. But still, it's a scary thought that something so powerful is even lurking out there to begin with.
The last men on the moon first to get their bloopers restored. Because Apollo 17 was the curtain call flight, flight. Thousands of pages of onboard voice were rushed out on typewriters, then forgotten. In 2012, volunteers led by historian Ben Feist began re-OCRing the 2,400-page air-to-ground PDF and syncing hours of cassettes. Buried lines include Gene Cernan crooning Christmas carols, Jack Schmidt's allergy sneezes, and the crew debating whose boots smelled worse. All stuff that NASA never intended for public release, but which humanizes the final Apollo Odyssey. Just 73 seconds after launch, the voices inside Challenger were swallowed by a fireball. NASA had a cockpit voice recorder, basically the shuttle's black box, running from 2 minutes before liftoff all the way to the instant the vehicle disintegrated on January 28, 1986. When the accident happened, the tape captured a brief burst of static and then cut off so sharply it sounded like someone yanked the plug. For months, investigators kept the reel under tight lock and key while they figured out whether any words were spoken after the explosion. When they finally released a heavily edited transcript, it surprised people. The crew's last lines were calm, checklist-style updates, no panicked yelling, no pleas for help. After those routine calls, the transcript simply ends with "end," putting to rest the rumor that the astronauts were alive and talking during the breakup. The raw audio itself is classified, partly to protect the families from reliving those final seconds, and partly because it serves as a lesson. In spaceflight, even the most ordinary launch can turn catastrophic in the blink of an eye. 1 minute, Mission Control was making small talk about cloud cover, and the next, every warning light on their console started blinking red. The official transcript, released by the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, preserves roughly 3 tense minutes in which engineers watch vital readings vanish in real time. First, temperature sensors on the left wing drop to off scale, low, meaning they're reading colder than physically possible. Seconds later, drag alarms flash as the shuttle starts slowing down unevenly, and then the radio crackles with brief bursts before cutting out completely. The final line ends halfway through a word. At that exact moment, Columbia was breaking apart high over Texas. With small bits of cockpit video survived the disaster, but out of respect for the crew's families, NASA has only shared silent clips and the written transcript, keeping the raw audio locked away. Millions were watching right up to the instant the screen went blank. On the 9th of July 2016, a pearly object drifted below the horizon on NASA's public ISS stream. Seconds later, the video cut to the blue loss of signal slate, igniting UFO speculation. NASA issued a shrug signal dropout happens, yet the timing was suspicious enough that the clip, preserved by a YouTuber, racked up millions of views before NASA's own copy quietly disappeared from its site. It's not definitive that something secret happened, but it certainly is fishy timing, don't you think? Fire in the cockpit, Apollo 1's lost final words. 17 seconds of panic and then total silence. On January 27, 1967, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were running a routine plugs out test when flames ripped through their command module. The onboard recorder caught Chaffee shouting, "We've got a bad fire," and White's frantic attempts to blow the hatch. Audio so harrowing, NASA sealed it during the accident inquiry and only summarized the words publicly. Decades later, fragments surfaced through an archival request confirming the crew stayed on mic until their oxygen umbilicals melted. Serious problem here on Gemini 8. Imagine spinning 1 revolution per second while the ground can't hear you scream. Neil Armstrong's first spaceflight was almost his last. 30 minutes after history's first docking, a stuck thruster sent Gemini 8 and its Agena target rolling violently. Out of contact, Armstrong and Dave Scott undocked, only to spin faster. When they finally regained a tracking ship, Scott's breathless call, "We're tumbling end over end," hit mission control like a gut punch. Internal loops stayed classified until long after Armstrong's moonwalk, revealing just how close he came to blacking out. No one on Earth could hear them, yet someone, or something, was whistling in their headset. While skimming 10 miles above lunar terrain in May 1969, Tom Stafford, John Young, and Gene Cernan caught a high-pitched woo on both VHF channels. "It even sounds outer spacey," Young joked, adding, "Nobody will believe us." The hour-long segment stayed on analog reels until NASA quietly posted the transcripts in 2008. Engineers later blamed radio interference between the command and lunar modules, but the crew's private worry that talking about it might ground them is frozen forever on the tape. The most watched human event ever, but the master reels vanished. Apollo 11's slow scan TV was recorded on backup telemetry tapes far clearer than the grainy broadcast we've all seen. In the early 1980s, facing a Landsat tape shortage, NASA likely bulk erased and reused them. A 2000s detective hunt proved fruitless. The best footage we have today is a restored composite made from foreign TV recordings and an 8mm film pointed at a monitor in Australia. The missing originals remain the greatest archival whoops in space history. What the heck was that on Apollo 12? Just 37 seconds after leaving the pad, every screen in mission control suddenly went dark. It was November 14th, 1969, and Apollo 12 was roaring through thick storm clouds when a lightning bolt shot up the 36-story Saturn V like an electrified spear. The strike knocked out all the spacecraft's electrical readings, fuel cells, guidance data, even the crew's cabin lights, so on the ground it looked as if the rocket had flatlined. Inside the capsule, Commander Pete Conrad blurted the now censored line, "What the hell was that?" while alarms howled in their headsets. Flight controllers were seconds from aborting when rookie astronaut Alan Bean remembered a checklist note from training. He flipped a tiny toggle labeled SCE to AUX, rerouting power to the signal conditioning equipment, the box that translates raw sensor data into numbers everyone can read. Instantly, the dials sprang back to life and Conrad fired off a perfectly deadpan order. "Okay, Houston, turn the buses off, then back on." That one comm switch flip saved the lunar mission, proving that even with a giant rocket and an army of engineers, success can hinge on a split-second memory and a two-letter acronym. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." We all know the movie line, but the scariest chatter never made the newsreel. Back on the 13th of April 1970, Apollo 13 was coasting toward the moon when an oxygen tank in the service module ruptured. The blast snuffed out power, knocked life support systems offline, and set off a chain of frantic radio calls between the spacecraft and mission control in Houston. For decades, the public only heard a tidy highlight reel. Then in 2020, NASA archivists finished digitizing over 7,200 hours of mission control tapes, shelves of dusty reels no one had replayed since the mission ended. Click into the Apollo 13 in real-time website today and you can follow every second as if you're wearing a headset at console. ECOM, the electrical environmental officer, gasps as gauges plummet, Capcom keeps his voice steady for the crew, and flight director Gene Kranz mutters under his breath while piecing together a rescue plan. Hearing the unfiltered confusion, the quick thinking, and the occasional curse words makes NASA's most celebrated, successful failure feel startlingly real and shows just how close 3 astronauts came to never coming home. A flash, a zero-G dance, and a hard right turn at 20,000 miles per hour captured on live feed. Night vision cameras tracking an Aurora experiment caught a small luminous object darting across frame. A bright flash, possibly thruster plume, triggered the object to change direction instantly. Then a second object shot in from below. NASA later said they were, quote, ice particles reacting to RCS jets, but physicists noted the maneuver would require a sudden acceleration high enough to liquefy any ice. The uncut video leaked, sparking one of the first internet-age UFO debates, still unresolved. Ever see a flying saucer 3 times the size of Earth's radius? Astronaut Story Musgrave watched 2 gigantic self-illuminating disks drift just below the shuttle while Columbia was 190 miles up. They appeared on multiple cameras, expanding as if growing, before fading into Earth's limb. NASA blamed lens reflections, but veteran engineer Mark Carlotto's pixel analysis showed parallax motion inconsistent darkened with glare. Musgrave, a 6-time shuttle flyer, now tells lecture audiences he's convinced intelligent life is out there and STS-80 is why. 6 bright lights in a perfect row flew under my boots, then vanished. While installing navigation antennas, ISS Commander Leroy Chiao spotted a horizontal line of lights racing across the dark ocean below the ISS, speed around 17,000 miles per hour. Ground controller suggested shrimp boats off Brazil. Chiao dry laughed. He was 220 miles up and the pattern matched neither cities nor storms. He reported the sighting but never received an official follow-up. Years later, when asked if he'd seen a UFO, he answered, quote, "I saw something I couldn't explain and no one ever tried to." A Soviet hero meets a silent cruciform craft, then the tape disappears. While approaching the malfunctioning Salyut 7 station, Vladimir Zanabikov filmed a cross-shaped object rotating end over end 50 meters off his port window. He assumed it was lost hardware until it halted mid-tumble, cocked 45 degrees, and darted behind Salyut in a blink. The cosmonauts whispered that it, quote, "looked back at them." Soviet controllers ordered the film canister returned by secure diplomatic pouch, and to this day, no frames have ever been released, and Russia's archives list the reel as, quote, "missing." When a decorated Navy SEAL calls something in space weird, you pay attention. During lockdown-era orbits, Chris Cassidy spotted a metallic dog-bone-shaped object drifting near the station. He filmed it on his phone and radioed the sighting. NASA later said it was a small bracket from a recent Progress resupply, except inventory showed all brackets accounted for. Cassidy's video reveals the object making a slow roll, then a tiny puff of vapor jets it sideways before it slips out of view. NASA clipped the maneuver from the clip released to news outlets, citing, quote, "privacy of operational data." Picture streaking around the planet at 17,000 miles per hour and realizing something is pacing you. On his final orbit, Gordon Cooper radioed a calm but urgent message. A luminous green object had slipped into formation with his capsule, matching speed and altitude over the Pacific. The onboard experiment camera captured it, yet the film reportedly returned overexposed when NASA processed it. Cooper stuck to his story for decades, even testifying before the United Nations that he'd watched a structured craft, not a meteor, slide away toward the dawn. NASA's official log simply calls it an instrumental anomaly. One minute it looked like a flying beer can, the next it vanished without a trace. While trying to nap, James McDivitt saw a silvery cylinder with antenna-like protrusions drifting past the cockpit. He grabbed a camera and snapped 2 hurried frames before the object accelerated upward into the sun's glare. Debunkers later suggested it was a discarded rocket stage, but the timings never matched and NORAD's radar showed no known debris near Gemini. McDivitt, later manager of the Apollo program, maintained he'd seen hardware we didn't launch. Humanity's first moon crew may have had uninvited company. During the coast to lunar orbit, Neil Armstrong reportedly switched to the medical channel, less likely to be recorded, to ask what the transient lights were outside their window. Michael Collins later recalled bright points, quote, "shaped like an open suitcase, rotating alongside the command module, prompting a quiet debate over whether they were ejected panels until the objects zipped off at right angles." NASA's public transcript never mentions the exchange, but declassified mission debriefs note a, quote, "unresolved visual. The legend of Apollo 11's secret UFO whisper was born." Imagine filming space history and then your own footage becomes classified for decades. While maneuvering the spacecraft, Ken Mattingly caught something boomerang-shaped glinting in the 16mm camera. Analysts later said it was the detached T adapter from the lunar module, but tracking data placed that adapter 2 kilometers away on a different vector. The raw film vanished into NASA's archives until released in the 1990s. Independent frame-by-frame analysis showed the object make a subtle course correction, something no passive hunk of metal could manage on its own. 2 veteran astronauts agree. A glowing, tumbling nugget tailed them for 10 minutes. During a routine solar flare watch, Jack Loosma and Owen Garriott noticed a dull gold object object with geometric facets keeping pace outside Skylab's dome port. Garriott confirmed its presence through binoculars. Mission Control asked for photos, but by the time the bulky film camera was aimed, the craft shot away straight through the station's forward attitude indicator, meaning the thing flew into the radar's blind spot. NASA filed the event as, quote, debris from prior launch events, even though no identified junk matched the trajectory.
Next on the list, we have the Nauka thruster glitch. Nauka, or the Multi-Purpose Laboratory Module, is a module of the International Space Station. When it successfully docked on the station on July 29th of 2021, something kinda scary happened. Its thrusters started acting up, causing the entire station to rotate around. So the Nauka successfully docked with the ISS and everything seemed fine, but a few hours later, while the crew was preparing to open hatches, Nauka's onboard computers had a glitch. This caused the module to unexpectedly fire its thrusters, making the ISS suddenly rotate. Now, astronauts are trained to deal with stuff like this. They know that glitches can happen and things can go wrong, but just imagining being out in a rotating space station in the middle of the black void of space, that's a pretty freaky situation to be in. Ground controllers were able to fix the glitch though, and the station eventually returned to its proper position. Alright, you know what really sucks? Toilet trouble. Issues with plumbing, it just completely upends your life. You feel lost and confused. As bad as a broken toilet is here on Earth though, imagine being stuck up in space and realizing you have a busted crapper. That is a truly horrifying thing to discover. In 2021, astronauts departing from the ISS realized they were going to have to head back to Earth without a toilet. The 4 astronauts had a 20-hour journey back to Earth in their SpaceX capsule, and they'd have to do their business in diapers the entire time. Oh, and this is the same crew that had to endure the whole thruster malfunction that had the entire space station rotating, by the way. Not the luckiest bunch here. By Earth standards, anyway. By astronaut standards, I guess they kind of are pretty lucky, because they made it to space and back without, dying. Next up, we have even more toilet trouble. Turns out there's been issues on the International Space Station as well. This incident happened back in 2019. The crew of the ISS was attempting to upgrade their toilet and ended up causing a water leak. The toilet they currently had on board had been installed in 2008 and was a bit outdated. This new universal waste management system would be less clunky, it was cleaner, and just overall more efficient. But one of the water pipes leaked and 2.5 gallons of water started floating about the station, which the astronauts then had to collect. Luckily, the pipe leaked before the toilet was officially christened, because that would have been truly nightmarish. Floating around, collecting water, fine. Actually might have been kind of fun. Floating around in space having to gather up yellow or brown water, not quite as enjoyable. I also don't know why they didn't install that toilet when the capsule was still on the ground, but oh no, it's on the space station. It's up in space. Never mind. In June of 1965, astronauts Ed White and James McDivitt spotted something strange while passing over Hawaii. They were in a Gemini spacecraft when they spotted something that looked like a UFO. It was metallic, and they also described it having long arms sticking out of it. McDivitt spotted the object while White was asleep. He grabbed a 16mm film camera to try and take footage of the object. White then woke up saying he spotted the thing as well. McDivitt contacted the capsule coordinator attempting to describe what they were seeing. In part of the transcript, McDivitt is quoted saying, "I just saw something else up here with me, but just as I was getting close enough to take a good picture, the sun got in the way and I lost it." He went on to say, "It had big arms sticking out of it looked like. I only had it for just a minute. I got a couple of pictures with a movie camera and one with the Hasselblad, but I was in free drift. Before I could get the control back, I drifted and lost it." Now this one needs to be taken with a grain of salt, or a lot of grains. It's a Reddit post made by a now deleted user attempting to stay anonymous. They claim to be an ex-astronaut who experienced something strange while on a mission, and I just think this is a spooky story, real or not. They write, "I can't disclose my identity, but let's just say I've been around the celestial block a few times. It was a routine spacewalk checking the exterior of the ISS. Everything was humming along when I noticed this faint glow just beyond the Earth's horizon. At first I thought it was the sun playing tricks, but this was different. It was a subtle shimmer, almost mirage-like. I radioed Houston to check if there were any anomalies, but they said all systems were normal. It was just strange, a gentle, pulsating light, and not blinding, but kind of hypnotic. As I reached out to grab a handrail, I felt a strange, static charge. That's when things got downright eerie. I saw these tiny, luminous particles dancing around me, forming intricate patterns. Suddenly, the particles converged into this figure, humanoid in shape, but made of pure light. It just hovered there, staring at me. No facial features, just a luminous silhouette. The next thing I knew, the figure disappeared into those shimmering particles and floated away. I radioed Houston, but they couldn't pick up anything unusual on their end. I finished the spacewalk, returned to the station, and went about my duties like nothing happened. But every time I look down at Earth, I can't shake the feeling that there's something out there, something beyond our understanding. Call it space-induced hallucination or whatever, but I swear that encounter was unlike anything I've ever experienced. And finally, we have the tale of the knocking. So in 2003, Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei was launched on his first mission up to the vast darkness of space. He was China's first man in space. He was sent up in a small craft all alone. Again, first time. Brave dude right here. Going up to space would be scary enough as it is, but things got creepy when Liwei started hearing something. He was in space all alone when he began hearing what sounded like a knock on the spacecraft. He described it as, quote, someone knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer, and went on to say it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship. He took a look outside the porthole and nothing, which was actually probably a relief. Here on Earth, if we heard a knocking sound on our door and opened it only to find there was nothing there, we'd be totally freaked out, right? But in space, probably for the best, we don't see anyone or anything. Once he returned to Earth, he tried to recreate the sound, but was never able to. It's still a mystery as to what he was hearing up there. We're going to start up the list with an incredibly alarming situation. Really, this is the last thing you'd want to find in space, aside from an alien face hugger on board. A freaking air leak. On the 6th of June of 2018, the Soyuz MS-09 mission launched. 3 astronauts, including a Russian commander and 2 flight engineers, 1 American and 1 German, were transported to the International Space Station. For a couple of months, their time on the ISS was pretty routine as being in the middle of space can be, anyway. That was until the 29th of August. It was in the middle of the night, and the crew received a message from Mission Control. They detected a slight change in air pressure and found that there was a small air leak. There was a 2mm hole in the orbital module. So 2 millimeters, tiny, but in space, this would be incredibly alarming. Fortunately, they managed to seal up the hole and there were no more changes in air pressure, but they had some questions as to how this hole got there in the first place. And it turns out something shady could have gone on. Apparently this hole had been hidden with a, quote, low-quality patch job and had apparently been created with a drill. Russian officials became suspicious of NASA, accusing them of intentionally sabotaging the mission. There were even theories that one of the crew members themselves drilled the hole, as it was found to have been drilled from the inside. A Russian tabloid accused the American astronaut on board of creating the hole after she apparently had a failed romantic relationship with another member of the crew. Just really outlandish stuff. The whole thing was a complete mess, and we still don't know exactly what went on here. Next on the list we have the Space Snake. Astronaut Musgrave is a retired NASA astronaut who's had more experience in space than most in the field. He also has 6 degrees, he's a physician, a mathematician. The man is incredibly experienced and intelligent. He also firmly believes that there is life out in space, and he may have had a first-hand experience. He claimed to have seen an 8-foot-long snake-like creature on 2 separate space missions. He was featured on an episode of the TV series Sightings, speaking about his odd experiences with the creature, and was quoted saying, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It is rubbery because it has internal waves in it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, more primitive, some just proteins coming together, amino acids, and just some single-cell organisms, and other civilizations that have been around for million years that are doing unimaginable kinds of things. The SpaceX CRS-7 incident. The SpaceX 7 was a mission to send an uncrewed spacecraft, the Dragon, to resupply the International Space Station. It was the Dragon's 9th flight. It launched from the Falcon 9 launch vehicle, and at first, everything seemed fine, but 139 seconds into the launch, a cloud of white vapor appeared, and there was a sudden loss of pressure in the liquid oxygen tank of the Falcon 9's rocket's second stage. The rocket continued for a few seconds before breaking apart. The Dragon CRS-7 capsule was thrown clear of the explosion and hit the ocean. SpaceX said the capsule could have been saved if the parachutes had deployed, but the software didn't have the right instructions for that situation. It was found that a metal piece called a strut had failed. This particular strut held a high-pressure helium bottle in place within the rocket's liquid oxygen tank. Because the strut failed, helium rushed into the tank, causing too much pressure, and it eventually burst. Now, luckily, there was nobody on board. Again, this was an unmanned mission, but it just goes to show how much of a risk spaceflight is. Every time astronauts launch into space, they're risking their lives. Things can just go wrong at the drop of a hat. The same goes for this next failed mission, the Cygnus Orb-3. Again, nobody aboard, but it would have been disastrous if there was. So this was an attempted flight of an automated cargo spacecraft. Again, it would have brought food and supplies to the crew of the International Space Station. This would have been Cygnus's 4th flight to the ISS. The Antares rocket carrying the Cygnus spacecraft launched on October 28th, 2014. Just 15 seconds after liftoff, though, there was a failure in the first stage's propulsion system. The rocket started falling back to the launch pad. This could have been quite a disaster. A rocket plummeting into the Earth, might cause some bodily harm to workers down there. So in order to prevent that from happening, the range safety officer activated the flight termination system. Basically, the thing self-destructed just before hitting the ground. How awesome would it be to press a button that makes a rocket explode in midair? I imagine it being a big red button with explode written on it, but it's probably a bit more sophisticated than that. This explosion was so intense, though, that it could be felt 20 miles away. Thankfully, no one was injured, but there was substantial damage to the launch pad.
In March of 1956, cosmonauts Alexei Leonov and Vladimir Komarov boarded the Vauxhall 2 and embarked on the first space mission to carry more than one crew member. And on March 18th, Alexei Leonov performed the first ever spacewalk, which was an amazing feat, but almost ended in Alexei becoming lost in space and subsequently dying of either exposure or asphyxiation. You see, when attempting to re-enter the Vauxhall 2 after his spacewalk, Alexei ran into a slight problem. His spacesuit had become filled with air, making it impossible for him to re-enter the spacecraft feet first, as intended, to ensure the safety of the astronaut. Luckily, his training had prepared him for all kinds of hazardous situations, and so he quickly came up with a plan that involved him slowly releasing the excess air from his spacesuit so that he would be able to enter the Vauxhall 2, although it was clear that feet first was no longer an option, and that he would have to enter the craft head-on in order to survive the ordeal. Oh, and if he didn't complete the task within the next 40 minutes, he would surely suffocate in the vacuum of space because his air was running out, and his body temperature was rising rapidly due to extortion. Luckily, he remained calm and was able to avoid disaster. Unfortunately, his partner, Vladimir Komarov, would not be so lucky in the years to come.
Vladimir Komarov was a Soviet cosmonaut set to pilot the Soyuz 1 mission in 1967. The mission was supposed to be a huge success for the Soviet Union, but Komarov was well aware that there were a number of technical problems with the spacecraft. He even reportedly told a close friend that he knew he wouldn't be coming back alive. But he chose to fly anyway, fearing that his backup, Yuri Gagarin, would be sent instead. Sure enough, as soon as Soyuz 1 launched, things started to go wrong. One of the solar panels failed to deploy, which meant the spacecraft didn't have enough power. Communication was spotty, and Komarov was left struggling to manually operate the spacecraft. Back on Earth, engineers were trying to come up with solutions, but the problems just kept piling up. Komarov stayed in orbit, isolated in a faulty spacecraft with very little hope of a safe return. But He stayed calm and collected as he could, trying to make the most of this very bad situation, but the whole time he must have been aware that his chances of survival were very slim. As Komarov attempted to return to Earth, the parachutes that were supposed to slow down the descent failed to deploy properly, and it tragically crashed, killing Komarov instantly.
On January 28th of 1986, NASA's Space Shuttle Challenger burst into flames no more than 75 seconds after takeoff, ending the lives of all 7 astronauts aboard the craft, including Krista McAuliffe, a school teacher who had joined the mission as part of the Teachers in Space project, with the hopes of filming educational videos in space, in the hopes that it might reignite American children's love of learning. At a height of about 46,000 feet and above the Atlantic Ocean, the Challenger practically disintegrated, while onlookers watched in horror as the fates of the astronauts became sealed inside of their airtight vessel. The incident later became quite the scandal, as after it occurred, NASA released a report stating that while the organization was unaware of what caused the accident, they were sure that the cabin crew would have been unconscious at the time of the explosion due to the cabin's pressure. A report that was later dismissed as a poor excuse for a cover-up attempt, when it was revealed that the crew was most likely fully awake and possibly fully aware of the fact that an explosion was about to take place. Furthermore, the Rogers Commission also revealed that NASA had not taken proper safety precautions prior to the mission. Not only that, but they also never received an engineer's stamp of approval declaring the spacecraft flight ready prior to the attempted launch. Again, a massive oversight.
The Space Shuttle Columbia was the oldest shuttle in NASA's fleet, and it had been on numerous successful missions before. On January 16th of 2003, it launched on its 28th mission with a crew of 7 astronauts: Rick Husband, William McCool, Michael Anderson, Elin Ramon, Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, and Laurel Clark. And during the launch, a piece of foam insulation broke off from the external fuel tank and hit the shuttle's left wing. Now, NASA knew about this foam strike but didn't realize the true extent of the damage. While the crew continued their work in space, engineers on the ground debated the severity of the situation, but no one fully grasped just how bad this really was. After 16 days in space, Columbia began its descent back to Earth on February 1st of 2003. As it re-entered the atmosphere, hot gases entered the shuttle through the damaged wing, causing it to snap right off. There was nothing the crew could do at that point. The shuttle just completely disintegrated over Texas and Louisiana.
Another near-death experience took place on October 16th of 1979 when cosmonauts Vyacheslav Zudov and Valery Rozhedestvensky attempted to re-enter Earth's atmosphere in Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 23. Unfortunately for the two men, strong winds caused the vessel to land 75 miles, 120 kilometers away from its targeted landing point. And to make matters even worse, the spacecraft landed in an icy lake. But wait, there's more. Almost immediately after touchdown, Soyuz 23's parachute, which had deployed to slow the spacecraft's descent, began taking on water, and subsequently dragging the Soyuz down towards the bottom of the lake as temperatures inside of the main capsule reached negative 17 degrees Celsius, 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Many failed rescue attempts were made, including an attempt to airlift the capsule, which was ultimately just too heavy. But eventually, the remaining pieces of Soyuz 23, including the main cabin containing the men, were dragged ashore, 11 hours after it had touched down on Earth. When rescuers opened the cosmonaut's hatch, Zudov was unconscious and frost had almost completely lined the interior of the vessel. Luckily, both astronauts did make a full recovery, but had they spent any longer in the icy waters of Russia, things could have been way worse.
The Apollo 12 mission was the second manned trip to the moon. It took place just a few months after Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's Apollo 11 landing. This was a big deal because it was another chance to prove that landing on the moon wasn't just a one-time thing. Apollo 12 lifted off on November 14, 1969, with astronauts Charles Conrad, Richard Gordon, and Alan Bean on board. Right as the rocket was climbing into the sky, though, something pretty terrifying happened. It was struck by lightning. Not once, but 2 times. The first strike was even visible to the people watching from the ground, which would have been, a pretty incredible sight, but no doubt horrifying. Like, my God, what happens when lightning strikes a rocket? Well, luckily, in this case, everything was still working fine. The electrical systems rebooted, and they continued on with the mission. Once in space, the Apollo 12 team went on to land on the moon just like planned, but it was definitely not the smooth trip up that they'd been hoping for. As Pete Conrad famously stated, "That may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me." And the return to Earth wasn't easy either. When the spacecraft splashed down in the ocean, a big wave hit them. This jolt knocked a 16mm camera loose, and it hit astronaut Alan Bean on the head, giving him a pretty nasty cut. Thankfully, Pete Conrad jumped into action and patched Bean up right away.
Two astronauts, Sunny Williams and Barry Wilmore, are currently stuck in space with no clear timeline of when they will be returning home. In June, it was revealed that the two astronauts had become stranded on the ISS due to multiple malfunctions aboard the space station. On June 5th, the pair had gone up into space on Boeing human orbital spacecraft Starliner with the goal of spending just 8 days outside of our atmosphere, but unfortunately plans changed when a helium leak coupled with a failure in 5 of the Boeing's 28 reaction control system thrusters took place, leading to the pair becoming stuck on the space station with no way home. Recent updates have revealed that the Starliner is in no position to bring the astronauts back down to Earth, and so NASA is currently working on a backup plan that involves Elon Musk's SpaceX Dragon capsule, which was supposed to launch earlier this month, August 2024, but the launch has since been pushed back to September as NASA is currently considering cutting 2 of the 4 astronauts aboard the Dragon capsule in order to make room for Sunny and Barry. However, a decision is yet to be made. Really hoping they figure this one out sooner rather than later, because the whole situation sounds really scary and kind of like a huge oversight.
The Soyuz 11 mission is one of the most tragic stories in space history. So in 1971, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Viktor Patsayev, and Vladislav Volkov became the first crew to successfully dock with and live aboard a space station, Salyut 1. This was a big deal at the time because living in space for an extended period was still a brand new and very exciting concept. Everything seemed to be going well. The team spent 23 days aboard Salyut 1 conducting experiments and sending back data to Earth, but as they prepared to return home, things took a turn. During re-entry, as they descended towards Earth, communication with the crew suddenly stopped. When rescue teams reached their landing site, they found that the craft looked totally fine from the outside, but when they knocked on the outside, there was no response. And when they opened the hatch, they found all 3 cosmonauts motionless inside the capsule. Patches of their skin had turned blue. They'd obviously suffocated. So a tiny valve had opened too early during re-entry, and the valve was supposed to open once they were safely back in Earth's atmosphere, but it opened prematurely, causing the cabin to depressurize. The crew had no spacesuits on at the time, so they couldn't survive the sudden loss of pressure. To date, this is the only case of humans actually dying in space.
The failed Apollo 1 NASA mission is arguably one of the most controversial missions in NASA's entire history, and that is saying something because in the past NASA has done quite a number of incredibly questionable things. While astronauts Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Schaefer were not in space when the incident occurred, they were aboard the Apollo 1 rocket, which unfortunately never actually made it off the ground. While waiting in excited anticipation for their journey, which was supposed to end in the astronauts' safe return to Earth after having been the very first men to have ever stepped foot on the moon, a flash fire broke out inside the command module that was likely sparked by an electrical short that took place under one of the 3 astronauts' footrests. Because the capsule was filled with pure oxygen, it was highly combustible and the whole thing went up in flames within seconds. Unfortunately, the 3 men were unable to escape the burning spacecraft and perished inside. Of course, this led to extreme public outrage and a major demand for a reevaluation of NASA's safety protocols, which did occur, but as you can tell by many of the points on this list, they still have quite a lot of work to do.
Apollo 13 was supposed to be another routine mission to the moon, as routine as a mission to the moon can get anyway, but it quickly became one of the greatest survival stories in history. On board were astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes, who blasted off from Earth on April 11th of 1970. Everything was going smoothly until 2 days into the mission when an oxygen tank exploded. The explosion ruptured the service module, which was their main spacecraft, and left them with very little power. The lunar module, which was originally meant to land on the moon, suddenly became their lifeboat. It was the only part of the spacecraft that still worked and could provide life support. The crew and NASA had to figure out how to get these astronauts back to Earth using whatever they had left. There was a ton of improvisation and on-the-fly problem solving. They had to conserve power, so they turned off almost everything that wasn't absolutely necessary, leaving them freezing cold and struggling with low oxygen. They also had to manually adjust their trajectory to make sure they'd slingshot around the moon and head back to Earth. Meanwhile, NASA engineers on the ground scrambled to develop a plan to keep them alive and bring them home safely. And as insane and dire as this situation was, against all odds, the crew made it back, splashing down the Pacific Ocean on April 17th. And of course, as is tradition, Tom Hanks starred in the survival picture about this movie. I think he stars in like every survival biopic. Like, he just does tons of them. I'm not going to list them here because I can't think of them off the top of my head, but just list down below in the comments. I think we'll be able to come up with like 10. 12 mission as, quote, a small step for Neil, but a long one for me. And at no time was that more clear than when not one, but two lightning strikes hit the shuttle on takeoff. Terrifying. On November 14th, 1969, Apollo 12 launched from Kennedy Space Center at 11:22 a.m. Things were looking kinda ominous though. There were dark clouds overhead, heavy winds. I'd be uneasy getting on a plane in conditions like that, let alone a rocket heading to space. Just over 35 seconds into liftoff, the Saturn V rocket was struck by lightning, causing a voltage surge that knocked out all three fuel cells, leaving the spacecraft to run solely on its batteries, which weren't powerful enough for all the systems. And then a second lightning strike hit 52 seconds into takeoff, taking out what's called the 8-ball attitude indicator. They were worried that the lightning might have affected the command module's parachutes. It was too late to really do anything about it though, so they just kept that information from the crew. Luckily, in the end though, the parachutes deployed just fine, and the Apollo 12 mission was a success. Theodore Freeman was an American astronautical engineer and test pilot who became a NASA astronaut in 1963. Sadly, he was the first astronaut to lose his life when his T-38 jet crashed on October 31st, 1964. On that day, Freeman was flying back to Houston after some training in St. Louis. The flight was delayed thanks to fog, which turned out to be partially responsible for the accident. Now, as he approached Ellington Air Force Base, a flock of geese was reported in the area. One of these geese struck the left side air intake of his craft, causing the engine to flame out. The engine out, Freeman tried to land on the runway but realized he was too low and might hit nearby military housing. So he banked away from the runway and prepared to eject. But unfortunately, because the jet was nosing down, he ejected nearly horizontally. His parachute failed to deploy in time, and he died on impact. Freeman knew the risks that came with being an astronaut though, and despite these risks, he was passionate for his work. To quote him, "We don't look on this as dangerous work. It's about the most fascinating job I could imagine. Too much pain. Do something please to kill the pain." These were the last words spoken by Valentin Bondarenko, a Soviet fighter pilot who was selected as a cosmonaut in 1960. March 23rd, 1961, he was on a 15-day endurance experiment inside a low-pressure altitude chamber in Moscow. The chamber had an atmosphere that was at least 50% oxygen, making it highly flammable. On the 10th day of this experiment, after finishing all his tasks for the day, Bondarenko removed some monitoring sensors from his body. Then he started using an alcohol-soaked cotton ball to clean his skin. He tossed it aside without thinking, and it happened to land on a hot plate he was using to brew tea. The cotton ignited, and when Bondarenko tried to put out the small fire with his sleeve, he caught on fire almost immediately. The chamber was under pressure, and it took nearly half an hour for a doctor to open the door to get to him. By the time help arrived though, Bondarenko had suffered severe burns over most of his body. He died from shock 16 hours after the accident. In honor of his contribution to space exploration though, a crater on the moon's far side was eventually named after him. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger launched from Kennedy Space Center at 11:38 a.m. 58 seconds into flight, 9 puffs of smoke were spotted coming from the rear solid rocket booster. Cold temperatures had compromised the O-rings, which were meant to seal the joints, allowing hot gas to escape, causing damage to the craft. As Challenger continued its ascent, a flame burst through the joint of the booster. Just moments later, the right booster detached from Challenger, leading to a catastrophic explosion. Pilot Mike Smith's last recorded words were simply, "uh-oh." as the shuttle began to break apart. Debris scattered over the Atlantic Ocean. February 1st, 2003, the Columbia Space Shuttle, commanded by Rick Husband, was in the middle of its re-entry when it broke apart in the sky, killing everyone on board. The shuttle had sustained damage to its thermal protection system during its launch, which allowed superheated air to enter into the left wing, and this caused serious issues as the shuttle descended, leading to increased drag and loss of control. Around 8:53 a.m., the shuttle started shedding all this debris. By 8:58, the shuttle systems began reporting multiple failures. Just a minute later, communication with Columbia was abruptly lost. Rick Husband's last recorded words were a simple "Roger," before the connection cut off. Columbia broke apart in the atmosphere, resulting in the loss of all 7 crew.